It was the last Thursday of October when the district tagged me to check the northern firebreak, a strip of old road that runs the spine of Ashlar Ridge and pretends to be a trail whenever the map needs one. We hadn't had a significant burn up there in more than 20 years. But policy says you walk it before winter clear culverts, note blowdowns, and make sure the old lookout at the end hasn't been turned into a clubhouse again. I signed out the truck at 6:40, logged the weather 38, falling and started up the gravel that has taught generations of shocks how to suffer. The firebreak is gated a mile from the top. From there you hoof it. The morning light never really reached the ground. It filtered through fir and cedar and turned the air the color of a bottle's bottom. I kept a steady pace, listening to the sort of silence that isn't silence drip-off needles. A flick of a wren, far woodpecker taps that set your teeth to counting. A deer crossed ahead and left the neat check marks of hooves in the soft. No people. I like that part of the job, the stretch before anything human intersects with your plan. Half a mile from the lookout spur, I started seeing boot prints, fresh, 2 pairs. One with a long stride and a blocky heel, the other smaller and narrower. More pressure on the outside edge, like a runner who's done something to an ankle and never fixed it right. They stayed tight together and never wandered to look at views that don't exist. I told myself day hikers could come up early. Then I remembered the gate and how quiet the lot had been. The clearing at the spur was as I'd left it in August waist-high grass. A ring of stumps, the lookout rising on its spindly legs like a child's drawing of a house in the sky. The door at the top should have been shut. From the ground, I could see it breathing open and closed on the wind, the latch thudding in a rhythm that made the hairs on my arms do arithmetic. I called out before climbing, "Park maintenance." No answer, just the wind. Inside was that familiar faint mix of dust and mouse and old resin. The table held the usual detritus maps, a broken pencil, a coffee ring. What wasn't usual? Newspaper sheets taped over the north and west windows. A blanket folded on the floor that hadn't been there in August. And a small camp stove on the counter, cold, but set like it had been used with care. Someone had been staying here, not squatting in a trash way, but nesting the way a person does who wants to return. On the wall beside the door, the padlock we'd installed still hung on its hasp. It wasn't cut. The screws holding the hasp were new, bright, and a size larger than before. Someone had removed the old hardware with a cordless drill and put in their own so the lock wouldn't matter. It was the kind of detail that says I have time. I stepped onto the catwalk to get a better radio shot to dispatch. The trees moved like a sea long after the ship has passed. Down below, at the edge of the clearing, a man stood where the prince had led. Dark jacket, orange beanie, face in the hood shadow. He didn't make a big show of being surprised to see me. He didn't do anything. He watched the way people at the edge of a fight watch, shoulders not quite square. Weight on both feet, hands visible but ready to learn. "Station's closed," I said. Loud enough to carry without sounding like I wanted a conversation. "We'll be wrapping for winter next week." He didn't answer. He turned and walked into the firs at a pace that read not hurry, but certainty, the gait of someone on their own map. I noted his height, maybe 6 foot, and the way his left foot rolled. The smaller set of prints I'd seen had that roll. Partner? Or the same guy in a different boot? From up here, I couldn't see if there was anyone else in the trees. I hate looking away from a person you don't trust, but I needed to log this. I keyed the mic and got a wash of static so clean it felt deliberate. When a signal should be ragged and it's pure silence, you notice. I went back inside to photograph the screws, the stove, the papered windows. By the door lay a small, folded piece of paper I swear hadn't been there before. A square torn from the corner of a topo map, edges crisp, fold neat. On it, written in careful block letters, "Lock stays open." Not a threat. A rule. I put it in an evidence bag because that's the part of the dance we do. And I climbed down with my eyes doing the wide thing they do when your ears are working harder than you want them to. On the spur road, I took my time looking at the ground. The prince looped the clearing twice, stopped at the foot of the tower, and then led back into the same trail they'd made coming in. Whoever it was didn't pace or hem and haw. In a round out, the gate was where I'd left it. The padlock had a faint smear around the keyway, greasy like someone with the wrong key had tried anyway. The dirt near the hinge post held the faint pattern of a bottle jack. You could lift the gate an inch with leverage and slide a chain off without cutting anything if you knew how. People know how dotted the truck. An index card sat under the wiper. Pencil, not ink, pressed too hard. Next week, don't waste time with the lock. Neat, patient. No fingerprints obvious, but graphite and rain don't shake hands in ways that help. I photographed it and bagged it and didn't like how steady my hands weren't. Back at the office, I filed the report. Evidence of occupation, hardware replaced, note left, unknown male seen. The supervisor looked at me over his glasses in the way that means we will do as much as our budget imagines. He called the county. A deputy drove the loop that night and found nothing but a fresh set of cigarette ends tamped into the gravel under the gate. Filters pinched so the prints didn't take. You learn what people practice by what they don't leave. A week later, I went back with a second Ranger and a drill. We pulled the new screws and set a backing plate inside, so the hasp couldn't be swapped again without sawing through 2 layers of stubborn wood. We left the padlock they'd asked us not to bother with. It's still up there now, presumably a joke to someone who likes old towers and empty, clears and the way sound travels differently when you're above it all. I check that place each season. Sometimes there's nothing but the mouse smell and a spider that learned geometry better than I did. Sometimes the windows have paper again, and the coffee ring on the table is new. The lock remains theater. Some doors you close for yourself, not for what's on the other side. It was the first Saturday after Labor Day when I took the caretaker shift at Lake Marin North, a campground that turns into a ghost town when the last minivan heads back to school night. My job in shoulder season is half janitor, half neighbor, clean the bathrooms, sweep the pads, answer the questions of the few who still come when the nights start to bite. It's easy money if you like trees and silence and the way the lake throws light in the late afternoon. That Saturday started ordinary. A retired couple in a fifth wheel baked apple bread and tried to give me a loaf. 2 grad students argued cheerfully over whether a map scale was lying to them. A father and daughter fished from the dock until the shadows came long. By 8, the loops were quiet enough that you hear zippers like voices. I did one last lap in the cart, checked the dumpsters for bears and tourists, and went back to the host site to read. At 2317, I remember because the page I wrote later has that number circled. I heard tires on gravel. Headlights swept through the cedars and landed on the kiosk like a plan. We don't get arrivals after dark in September. The gate is a moral suggestion. If you want to roll around it, you can. A white crossover with rental car plates idled by Site 14. After a minute, the engine cut. I grabbed my jacket and walked down the loop with the light I use for not startling people. A woman got out. Late 20s, hair stuck to her face where the rain had touched it. Wearing a black windbreaker and the look of someone whose day had run her like a mountain. Evening, I said with the kind of cheer you learn you can fake when the job needs it. We close arrivals at dusk, but if you're in a bind we can figure it out. She smiled like it cost something. I just need a place to sleep a few hours, she said. No gear visible. No second person in the car. The back seat held a single hard case and a sweater. She popped the hatch and pulled out a small 2-person tent that had never seen dirt. The rain had been on and off all day. The ground would take stakes, but not for long. Want a hand? I asked because watching someone fight poles in the dark is a special kind of meanness. We got the tent up quick. She thanked me, the sort of thanks that's mostly exhale, and disappeared inside with her case. The zipper's sound has a way of declaring an intention. I walked back to my site feeling good about a small thing done. Okay. Morning mist came in low and polite. The crossover remained. The tent did not. The stakes sat in their holes like teeth without a mouth. People pack early. I told myself that and poured coffee, then did the loop. Site 14 looked vacuumed. No footprint that wasn't last night's. No tire marks besides the crossovers. I knocked on the car window. No answer. I called out, giving the kind of pause you give when you might be waking someone who hasn't slept. Still nothing. At noon, a district ranger rolled through, and I mentioned it. He took the plate, said he'd run it through the rental company, and radioed the south gate to ask if anyone had seen a solo woman on foot. Nobody had. He found a parking permit flapping under the wiper blade of a sign near the boat launch. A day pass with that same plate number and yesterday's date, stuck there like a leaf. We walked the edge of the lake with that half-embarrassed feeling of people looking for something we can't name. 100 yards downshore, tucked under alder roots, sat a rolled length of bright blue tarp. Not park issue. New knots. We didn't open it. Could be nothing, he said in the tone that has to hold two truths at once. We left a note on the crossover, check in at host site. No one did. By dusk, the car was still there and the ranger called county. They sent a deputy who peered in with a flashlight and then peered at us in the way people do when they don't want to make you part of their report. He told us to hold. He'd check on the plate owner through the rental database. At 2140, I took the card out again because sitting makes your head invent. The lake holds sound like a dish. Across the water, on the north shore where the group sites sit empty in September, a generator coughed once and died. It's a distinctive sound you learn to tell model and mood. A minute later, a drone's thin whine sketched the air over the far dark. People fly them all summer, chasing sunsets and the fantasy that the world looks more like a postcard if you're above it. After Labor Day, you hear fewer. This one didn't carry a camera gimbal big enough to catch. I watched its little status flash drift toward the tongue of shore where I'd left the blue tarp in the ranger's notes. And then drift back. At midnight, the crossover's dome light glowed for a second and blinked out. I went because I'm paid to, and because not going would make the space behind my ribs unlivable. A folded piece of paper sat under the wiper. Pencil, not pen, like raindrops had offended it. Thanks for the help, it read. No signature. The handwriting wasn't the woman's from the registration slip. This was careful block, like someone practicing being ordinary. The rental company called the ranger the next morning. The contract holder had extended online from a different IP address than the one used to book, a city 2 hours away. It happens. Sometimes people run from something and make small choices that add up to a drift rather than a decision. The ranger asked if I'd seen the woman leave on foot. I hadn't. We popped the car with the company's blessing and found nothing but a sweater and an empty glove compartment. No tent, no case. The back seat bore the faint rectangle of where the case had been. That sort of negative is a presence louder than any item. A week later, a fisherman at the North Group sites found a neat camp nobody owned, tent pitched, pad inflated, stove set and cold. On the floor of the tent lay a park map. Circles marked 3 places: Site 14, the group site we stood in, and the ranger station between. The dates beside them stepped backward like someone unlearning a week. We never found a report to match the woman. No missing person, no family asking. The deputy filed a short memo about a rental vehicle unclaimed, later retrieved by tow. The ranger and I sometimes say, in the quiet after we move a raccoon from a dumpster or answer the same question about firewood for the 20th time. That this job feels like putting your hand into a stream to see if the water has a name. Most nights it doesn't. Some nights it writes thank you notes in pencil you didn't see anyone sharpen. I still host through September. I still walk the loop at 23 o'clock and again at first light. When a car arrives after dark and a tired person steps out with a small tent and the look of someone who wants to be smaller than their problem, I help them stake it. I make a note of plates and times because rituals keep the dark from being just dark. The next morning I check, and usually there's a body in a sleeping bag making the small fussy sounds people make before coffee. On the mornings when the tent is simply gone, I call the ranger and we take another walk along the shore where the lake makes everyone's plans sound like each other. We pick up what people leave that isn't trash, a folded map, a line of footprints that goes from normal to long in 3 steps, a penciled circle around a place that looks like anywhere else. It was the second week of January when I took the night shift at Timberline Lodge Annex, the little overflow complex the resort uses when the main rooms fill on holiday weekends. It sits a mile below the ski area where the highway narrows and the plows stack snow taller than a man. Off-season, the Annex hosts maintenance crews and the odd snow survey team. I was hired as overnight security, unlock a boiler room for contractors, check the parking lot, make sure nobody sleeps in their car and asphyxiates under a snow load. Boring work unless the weather or people make it otherwise. That Friday the temperature fell hard, and the wind polished the drifts to glass. By 23 o'clock, the lot was a frozen chessboard of rental SUVs, a handful of beat-up Subarus with roof boxes, and one delivery van that had no business being there, no logo, deep tire chains, backed into a corner where the cameras don't quite overlap. I wrote the plate down and told myself not to invent a story about it, yet at 017, the east stairwell smoke detector tripped. No one reported smoke. The panel just lit up like a nervous system. I pulled the key, opened the stairwell door, and breathed. Cold dust, no fire. I walked the halls and found nothing but a faint smell of old pizza near a crew room. False alarm happens when steam finds a sensor. I reset the panel and logged it. At 042, the same detector tripped again. This time the ground level exit alarm rang for 3 seconds and stopped. I stepped outside into wind sharp enough to shave and found a door propped open with a scrap of lumber. I kicked it free and followed the fresh boot prints around the annex to the lot. The delivery van's rear doors were ajar. A man stood by the bumper, phone to ear, speaking in the tone of the confident stuck. He saw me, smiled, and waved like we knew each other. "Sensors touchy in this cold," he said, though he was the one out here with no reason to know that. "I'm just waiting on a jump. Who called the exit alarm?" I asked. He shrugged, palms out. "Door sticks. Wind, maybe." I looked into the van. Shelves empty. A coil of extension cord. A crate of assorted hand tools. Nothing to deliver, nothing to pick up. "Who are you here for?" I said. "Kitchen," he said, too quick. "The annex has no kitchen, only a vending alcove and a microwave the night tech swears at weekly." He saw me realize this and adjusted without apology. "I mean main lodge. They told me to stage down here while they dig a slot." "Main lodge takes deliveries at the loading dock," I said. "Not in a blizzard at 1 a.m. He nodded like I'd confirmed a thing he already knew and pocketed his phone. "No harm done," he said, and swung the door shut. "I'll head down." He didn't. He idled. I did the thing the job requires. Called county dispatch with the plate, make. And the small human details that matter later, the way his chain links clicked on the pavement, the brand of his headlamp, the little triangle of reflective tape on the back of his glove. The dispatcher sighed the sigh of a person who wants to be everywhere at once and said she'd Ping a trooper on the highway. The detector tripped a third time at 111. This time, a door on the annex's west side stood open a foot and a half with snow blowing in. And fresh footprints led to 3 cars parked under the broken camera. Gloved hands had brushed rectangles in the frost on each rear window, just wide enough to read registration stickers and make model trim badges at a glance. On the last car, a pry bar had kissed the seam of the hatch and left a bite mark in the paint. I was still looking at the mark when the lot's far end flashed blue for a strobe's worth of time and vanished. Not a trooper too quiet. Not lightning wrong weather. A drone, I realized, with a tiny status LED hovering above the berm to see which way I turned. I faced it and lifted my hand as if to wave, then kept walking like it meant nothing. That was all theater for whoever watched the feed on a phone in a van with empty shelves. The trick with a place like this is to act like the place slow, predictable, with edges you can't quite see over. I locked the west door, wedged a shovel under the crash bar so it couldn't be blocked open again, and killed the breakers to the east stairwell detector. If there was smoke, the alarms in the hall would catch it. If there wasn't, they'd have to make a new trick. I called the plow lead on his night number and asked him to swing by the annex loop first on his next pass. "You got company?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. He laughed like he'd expected that answer. At 1:34, the delivery van eased out of its shadow spot and idled along the back row. The driver rolled his window down and pointed at a Subaru. "That one's got a cracked hatch," he called, as if we were colleagues. "Snow will creep in and soak the trunk." I walked to the Subaru and bent as though to look. While I was crouched, the van rolled toward the exit. The trooper's SUV came up the highway ramp just then and turned his light bar on full commitment. The van stopped in a posture of innocence and then slowly surrendered to the moment. The trooper took statements, ran the plate, ran the man, and found a stack of nothing you could take to a judge at 2 a.m. The van was registered to a rental agency. The driver had a license and a story that, while thin, didn't break in the wind. The trooper told him to leave and told me to call again if the annex's doors grew minds of their own. In the morning, 3 guests reported pry marks on their cars. Nothing taken. Nothing left but the feeling that someone had rehearsed touching their stuff. The manager asked if I thought we should hire another guard. I said no. What we needed wasn't more bodies. It was fewer blind corners and a camera that didn't go blind at 20 below. We moved a light standard, adjusted 2 lenses, and added a wedge to the east stairwell door so it wouldn't prop without. An alarm yelling in the warm part of the building, where people wake up and ask questions. I worked the annex through March. The van came back once. Different plate, same dent in the bumper. He parked under the new camera without knowing the angle had changed. He looked up, considered his reflection in the night, and backed out. If there's a moral in a winter like that, it's small, the line between safety and a rehearsal. For theft is sometimes a wedge, under a door and a person willing to keep walking when someone tries to script your route with alarms. I still take night shifts because I like the way a quiet building sounds when it breathes. And because the lot at 3 a.m. can tell you more about people than any lobby does at noon. If you work alone in places where the wind writes the rules, remember this. False alarms are never just false. There's someone asking what you'll do when they ring the bell. Do the boring thing. Do it twice. Make them ring a different bell. People who prepare for easy jobs prefer not to improvise. It was a wet Sunday in late April when dispatch sent me and another ranger to a distress call on the Backline Trail, a 2-day route that skirts the park boundary where the ridges fold into each other and the map turns green with contour lines packed too tight for comfort. A hiker had pinned 911 with a short burst of audio. 3 blasts on a whistle and a clipped voice saying, "Broken Ridge help." The tower caught just enough to draw a rough circle on a screen. The weather was wrong for helicopters. The cloud sat in the timber like a tenant who pays early and never leaves. We parked at the service gate and walked into a rain that couldn't decide if it wanted to be mist or knives. The back line is mostly honest rock, water, mud. At the 2-mile mark, the trail splits where a windfall opened the canopy years ago. You can feel the space there. Sound lifts and goes somewhere you won't. That's where we heard the whistle 3 short blasts. Textbook. My partner Jules answered with our pattern, 1 long, 1 short. A voice came back, faint. "Over here," but without the ragged music people have when they're cold, scared, or injured. We slowed. "Describe your location," Jules called, using the script we live by. Water? Slope? Trees? The answer should be mess, near a creek with a split log, steep uphill to my left, big fir with lightning scars. Instead we got, "Over here," again. Same volume, same tone, like someone pressing play on the same clip dot to the right of the split. A line of orange tape fluttered at knee height, newer than the park's flagging. It led into Salal so thick you'd have to part it with your shins. To the left, the true tread went into older timber where the needles drank sound. Jules pointed left and kept her voice casual. "We'll approach from the ridge," she called. No response. We moved, 100 yards on. We found a boot print in a patch of blow-in that held shape, a narrow foot, long stride, lugs shallow and clogged with clay. The toe pointed not toward the call, but back toward the split, as if someone had come from the direction we were going and then doubled back to lay tape. People lost don't usually do that unless they're panicking. Panickers tear tape. They don't tie it in neat little flags dot at the next creek. We saw it as shelter of branches leaned against a rock, textbook, kid in Scouts construction. It was dry inside. Too dry. The ground had no knees or elbows pressed into it, no leaf scuffs, no human mess. On the rock above the shelter, someone had drawn 3 triangles with charcoal, stacked like a crude arrow. You learn to see the grammar of panic, and this wasn't it. This was someone rehearsing panic for an audience. We called again. "We're on a creek. If you can hear us, describe what you see." The reply floated through the trees. "Over here," followed by 3 neat whistle bursts, each identical. The whistle's tail didn't fade like breath. "It stopped like a button. Electronics," Jules said. "Playback. Why stage it?" I asked. She didn't answer because we both knew time. Pull a team into the brush, thin the coverage on the trailheads, test the response pattern. Maybe get lucky with a car left lonely behind a fogged kiosk. We cut uphill to a low ridge where the radio might punch through. And from there we could see where the false tape path would have led. A patch of downed branches and slick clay, tilted toward a tangle of equal parts vine maple and gravity. A person moving fast and hopeful would go thigh deep and lose a boot. A person following a whistle without thinking about the lung behind it would yell and take a step, and then take another. We called in the location and the pattern. False shelter at coordinates, tape path off trail, whistle playback. Command shifted another team to the south approach and told us to hold the ridge and listen. We held. The forest held with us. The playback trick ran twice more in the next hour, the same over here, the same whistle, no breath, no wrong notes. It moved in a lazy triangle centered on the split, never far enough to be real. Always close enough to feel like a neighbor you can't see. At 1410. A team on the east spur found our actual hiker a mile from the ping, tucked into a gap between a fallen cedar and the root mat. Knee swollen and a voice that sounded like a person's. He'd gone down early, crawled to cover, and tried his phone until the battery surrendered. He hadn't blown a whistle. He hadn't heard one either, which told us what we needed to know about the fake. Whoever staged it kept clear of where we actually were. When the hiker was warm and limping toward the trailhead with a volunteer's arm under his, Jules and I walked the split again. We followed the orange tape this time, careful, until we found the source. A plastic grocery bag tucked in a stump with a roll of tape. A cheap whistle, a pocket speaker, and a handheld radio set to monitor our park frequency, no encryption. Just the public channel we use when we need a storm to hear us. The speaker had a micro SD card in it. We popped it. 10 files. Our training whistle pattern recorded clean. 3 versions of Over Here. 1 file with a ranger's voice reading the standard lost person script. Whoever made it had sat in on a class or listened online. None of that is hard. We took photos, bagged everything, and walked out slow with the kind of anger that doesn't benefit from heat. At the trailhead, a sedan idled with the window down and the driver doing nothing any cop could write. He looked at our uniforms, then at the hikers' cars, then at nothing at all. A deputy rolled by and parked behind him until he left. Resource on resource, attention on attention. That day it was enough. 2 weeks later, the district put a memo on the website. Do not follow tape not issued by the park. Verify distress calls by asking for descriptions of water, slope, and trees. Never leave a vehicle unsecured at remote trailheads. People read memos like they read weather, half with their eyes, half with whatever the day wants. I still run back. Line on my days off because the ridge knows its job and does it without theater. When I hear a whistle, I answer, and I ask the 3 questions that make a signal a person. What's the water doing? What's the slope like? What's your sky? If the reply is a button pressed from 30 yards into brush, I don't walk into it. I stand where a map says I belong and wait until a human voice remembers. It has lungs. It was late September when I moved into the cabin at Spur Road 9. A square of boards and stubbornness left from when the timber company thought the ridge would pay them forever. I was there to watch a thinning project on the north unit, nothing glamorous. Just counting truckloads, noting machine hours, making sure the work stayed inside a line that looks good on a planner's screen. The cabin had a stove that didn't care for damp wood, a pump that resented freezing, and a porch that made the world look more honest than it is. The first week, I learned the rhythms. Trucks at dawn. Saws mid-morning, quiet by 5, coyotes after 9. The second week, I learned the exceptions. A truck after dark. Saws that ran a little too long in a pocket where the line bent around a draw. Voices where voices shouldn't be. My job wasn't law. My job was to look and write. So I looked, and I wrote, and I kept the radio on the shelf where hears more than I do. On a Wednesday that felt like a Saturday, because sound had gone out of the woods, a man walked up the spur and stood at the edge of the gravel like he'd arrived on a thought. He wore a tan jacket with a patch from a company that hadn't held a contract in our forest for 2 years, a logo that still cropped up in pawn shops and Goodwill bins. He waved and smiled and called out, "You the caretaker?" "Just counting trucks," I said, which is the truth that opens the smallest number of doors. "Good," he said. "We're staging a container up near the slash pile tomorrow. Easier if your chain's open." The gate chain up at mile 0 had a county lock on it, married to our lock like people who don't share a language but need the same door. You don't just open that kind. "I'll let the ranger know," I said. He nodded like that solved everything, and looked past me at the porch, at the ledger on the table, at the coffee can of mails. "Need anything up here?" he asked. "Propane? Fuel? We gotta run tonight." "I'm fine," I said, because favors are threads, and threads love to tangle in your sleep. He nodded again, waved, and left in a posture of a man who had tested a surface and learned what weight it could bear. That night, long after the ridge should have gone back to being a ridge, an engine came up the spur soft and steady like a hand on a back. I killed the lantern and sat at the window. A box truck with rental panels on the side blank white that pretends to be no one eased past and up toward the unit. It didn't stop at the container pad because there wasn't a container pad. It climbed to the slash and turned where the ground never learned about compaction. I wrote the plate temporary tag in the corner of the windshield, the easy disguise, and the time. I didn't call because the radio is for answering, and I wanted to finish the page before I asked other people to wake up. In the morning, new ruts braided the last 100 yards of spur. At the slash, someone had dragged tarps over a rectangle of ground and tamped the edges with brush. You could hide a pallet or 3 that way. You could stage without staging. I walked the edge of the unit and found cut that wasn't our cut stumps too close together to be on the plan. But ends clean where we mark our logs, notched where ours aren't. Someone had taken a slice and planned to call it thinning. I called then. The ranger heard the part of my voice that doesn't like improvisation and said he'd come up with county. We waited. While we did, a sedan I'd never seen before idled at mile 0, beyond the gate, on the county side. The driver leaned on the wheel and made a study of dust as it drifted and settled. When he saw the ranger's truck in the mirror of the world, he turned around slow, careful hands. No panic, people who get paid to scout don't panic as a rule. The sedan passed us going down, a man with careful hair and a phone he didn't want us to see. The kind of face that forgets itself the moment you try to remember it later. County walked the unit. Took photos that look like every photo a county officer takes, gloved finger pointing at a cut stump. Boot beside a rut. Tape measure around a trunk to prove scale. We'll sit on it, the deputy said. They'll come back when they think we're done thinking. That night they did. 2 trucks this time, one up top on the spur, one down on the county road at the gate. The top one idled blacked out, the kind of dark a person learns on purpose. I turned the cabin light on and off twice in the pattern the ranger and I had decided without ever agreeing on it. A second later, the radio ticked with a click I know is his. No words, just that tick. We've all been cheap children with walkie-talkies. A click can be a sentence if you've learned each other's grammar. The truck up top rolled forward and stopped at the slash. Men moved, shapes at the edge of my eyesight. Something heavy shifted under the tarps, then slid toward a bumper. Down at the gate, the county cruiser turned his lights on all at once, the full blue attention of someone who had been patient and was done. The top truck tried to back, slipped in its own ruts, corrected, and found a gear that made smoke talk. They didn't run. There's nowhere to run on a spur. They did the thing people do when the world narrows. They pretended this was a misunderstanding. The deputy wrote what he could. The ranger wrote what he must. I made coffee for men who had been awake as long as I had, in different chairs. The box under the tarp, when we finally opened it, held 100 pounds of cable, 2 saw heads with their serials filed the way people file things. They want to sell without telling the buyer who owned them first. And 3 bagged bundles of antlers cut tight to the skull plate, not the way anyone with a tag does it. A small enterprise, not a cartel. Small is what you get where the world forgets to look. The next day the tan-patched man came back without the patch. He stood at the edge of the gravel like previous and looked at the cabin like it had told on him. "You called," he said. "Not quite a question. I wrote," I said. Which is the same thing in places where paper still means something. He smiled a private smile and said, "You won't always be here." He meant it in the way people mean weather and taxes. I watched him walk back to a car that wasn't the sedan, wasn't the box truck, wasn't anything a person remembers after they stop trying. I stayed through November. The thinning finished. The truck stopped. The cabin learned to be a building again. I kept the ledger because ledgers are how you remember yourself. When people come around and ask you to be a character in their plan. If you ever take an off-grid post like that, it helps to learn the difference between neighbor and visitor, between a question and an audition. The visitor will offer you fuel you didn't ask for. The neighbor will ask if you need nails, and then bring you fewer than you want, so you will come to town to get the rest and tell someone what you saw. I still go up Spur Road 9 when the snow lets the gate swing free. The porch is a better chair than town cell, and the ridge still tells the same story if you sit and shut up. Keep your line. Mark your edges. And if a man in an old patch asks you for the keys to government chains, hand him a pencil and tell him to draw a map of where he's headed. If he can't do that, he's not going anywhere you want to follow. It was the second weekend of November when I decided to finish the loop. I bailed on in Springtown line to Ridgecut. 12 miles out, camp one night, and back on the creek side where the grade is kinder on late season knees. A cold front had snapped the bugs out of the air and hardened the mud into something you could trust for a few hours at a time. I left the truck at the lower trailhead right after lunch, scribbled my route and time in the kiosk log because it costs nothing to leave breadcrumbs, and started uphill into that narrow kind of daylight you only get after the leaves are gone. The first miles were friendly. Oak leaves underfoot, a red tail somewhere above, the sort of wind that carries sound farther than sight. Near mile 4, the blazes got odd. Our blazes are rectangles, high on the trunk, paint slopped by a brush that's seen better seasons. These were crisp squares, lower than my shoulder, edges taped, and too frequent. Somebody had come through with a stencil and a plan. I trust blazes, but I also trust memory, and memory said the trail curved left along a rock rack before crossing a small seep. The new squares pulled right into younger timber. I stood a minute reading the ground the way you read a sentence twice when you think someone's changed a word. The true tread had that polished look where 1,000 feet have insisted the world is this wide and no wider. The new route looked swept off, brushed back, sticks moved just so. I followed the honest path. 30 yards later, I could see why the forgery worked. At the next bend, a white streak cut from a broken branch made the old rack look like bare sky through trees. You could pull a person that way, off the seam and into shin-pinching saplings. Not a prank. A funnel past the seep, I found the first line monofilament, stretched low between two saplings at exactly the height knees forget to check when daylight's going. I only caught it because a beech leaf had glued itself to the line and flashed wrong. It wouldn't trip a person. It would sing. Follow the song with your light, and you'd give up your spot while someone who said it watched. I snipped it with my little blade, pocketed the line, and started feeling like maybe I was walking across a stage. At dusk, I made camp on a bench above a curve in the creek flat enough for my small tent. A little windbreak of deadfall, and a view through bare branches that turned the water into mercury. Dinner was stove simple. I strung my food line higher than I needed to because habits don't care if bears are asleep or not. The night went quiet in the way November offers owls far off, the creek working the same problem it's always worked. Around midnight, a light crept along the opposite bank steady, chest height, moving slow and smooth. Not a headlamp. No bob. It paused opposite me, held for a count, and faded. A minute later, a second light winked farther upstream, a small, warm dot like a marker LED you'd see on a trail camera or a cheap drone. I killed my lamp and listened. Monofilament sings when wind plucks it, but this was the tiniest tremor plastic tapping bark. A note even smaller than that LED. It carried just enough to get inside my skull. I lay there counting my breath until the creek pushed back into the foreground. I slept some after. Morning made last night feel like a story I didn't want to tell myself, which is the danger of sunlight. I packed, crossed at a log where the creek braids, and climbed to Ridgecut. Halfway up, the new blazes returned. A line to pull me around a blowdown that any sane person would step over. The detour ran through a patch of duff so soft, it took prints like plaster. 2 sets were recent. One narrow, light, the toe specific the way trail runners are. One broader, boots with a shallow lug, weight rolled to the outside. They paralleled the new route and then stepped back to the honest tread as if whoever had set the show didn't need to believe their own work. Near the top, I saw a camera strap on a birch. Fresh but trying not to be bark scuffed at buckle height. The faint square print where something had sat. The camera itself was gone. People who know what they're doing don't leave hardware when attention might come later. 10 yards on, under a rock's lip, I found a battery pack wrapped in a grocery bag and a coil of that same monofilament. It wasn't a camp. It was a kit. I kept moving. At the ridge cut sign, someone had spun the arrow to point downslope toward nothing. I took a photo and set it straight with the flat of my palm. On the descent, the woods changed, voice more hemlock, less leaf. The creek louder, the world closer. Twice I saw bright thumbtacks pressed into bark at hip height. Red, then blue, each at bends where an impatient hiker would choose speed over sense. I pulled them and pocketed them with the filament. The bag in my hip belt got heavier with other people's plans. Back at the lot, the other cars were as I'd left them, except for one detail I almost missed. Someone had wiped the dust off my rear hatch around the plate. A neat rectangle the size of a phone screen. Under the bumper, a little strip of green painter's tape stuck to the hitch I didn't have. I peeled it. Marker. I walked the line of cars. 2 had the same dot under the bumper. 1 blue, 1 green. If you came back after dark and wanted to hit the easy ones, color coding beats memory. A deputy rolled through as I stood there with tape in my hand. He knew me by sight, the way small places make people into recurring characters. I held up the tape. He nodded, unsurprised. They like weekends after the first cold snap, he said. Less traffic. Folks get lax. We'll sit tonight. I went home the long way, stopping twice to check if paranoia had inflated into a balloon I should pop. It hadn't. I dumped my pockets onto the table, filament, thumbtacks, a little ED stuck to a coin cell with adhesive filigree. I sat and looked at the pile like it might form a map. Maybe it did. Maybe the map it formed just said, attention pays. I still finished that loop 2 weekends later because leaving it unwalked would have felt like a debt. The false blazes had faded under rain and time. Or someone learned this district keeps notes and didn't want to lose product to a deputy with patience. The honest blazes still wore their sloppy rectangles. I followed them and kept my headlamp in my pocket until I needed it because light is a sentence in a place that prefers quiet. If a person ever calls to me from the brush with a voice that doesn't understand breath, I won't walk into it. I'll stand where the tread is packed by years and say the 3 things that turn noise human. Tell me your water. Tell me your slope. Tell me your sky. If the reply is a button, I'll keep walking. It was a warm Thursday in early June when I drew evening boat patrol on Northwick Lake, the long, thin reservoir that feeds half the county and collects the other half's bad ideas come summer. We run a small aluminum skiff with a tiller and a light bar, slow enough to keep secrets, but loud enough to discourage the worst of the night swimmers. My job is simple as ink on the schedule. Confirm permits at the primitive sites. Remind folks that no fires means the thing it says. And nudge fishermen toward the kind of compliance that lets everyone sleep. By the time I slid the skiff off the trailer, heat had turned the lake's surface into a mirror slick enough to lie to you. On the east shore, the primitive sites looked like postcards, tents spaced honest, kayaks pulled high, a kid on a stump watching a marsh wren wage a war no human understands. I idled past, waved, and caught the small details that make you feel like the world is a place with rules. Food hung high. Stove on a flat rock, laughter at a volume the herons tolerate. The upper narrows are where trouble hides. In the doglegs where the shoreline pulls into itself and sound folds. I turned the corner into the last cove and saw a camp that didn't belong, tent pitched square. Brand new tarp at soldier angles, no footprints between water and shore. A cooler sat open with nothing melting inside. A fire ring had perfect ash but no scent. On the stump by the water, a cheap action camera on a clip watched the landing. It wasn't recording people having fun. It was recording who landed and what they brought. I cut the motor and let the boat's momentum make the next choice. On the bank, buried under leaf litter, a cable twined up a stump and disappeared toward the tent. I followed it with my eye and found a small metal box wired to a tree at waist-height retail trail cam. Infrared, pointed not at the game trail behind camp, but at the waterline. The box wasn't locked. Inside, the SD card had a strip of green tape with a date 3 days old. I didn't pull it. Evidence matters more than curiosity when curiosity costs someone a case later. Soft hum threaded the air above the cove thin, like a mosquito that studied engineering. A drone drifted in from the far shore, hovered, and then slid behind me to take my stern number. No hazard lights, just a little heartbeat flash of status. I lifted my hand like you do at neighbors you're not sure about and eased out. The drone didn't follow. It didn't need to dock 2 coves down a John boat, sat at anchor with 2 men fishing badly and enjoying it, in the way bad fishermen do, with beer and patience. As I came alongside, one of them lifted his chin toward the headland behind me. "They set that weird camp again?" he asked, as if we'd been in the middle of a conversation he'd just remembered. "What camp?" I said. "The one with the cooler no one opens," he said. We saw a kid walk up, look in, and leave like he'd seen a ghost. No one ever stays there. But there's always a guy on the road later with a flashlight who looks like he's counting cars. I nodded. "You boys have permits?" They did, in a back pocket, folded around cash for a burger shack that wouldn't be open this late. We let the water move us a minute and watched a Huron misjudge a fish by a foot and pretend it meant to dot at dusk. I ran the west shore and called in the cove. Dispatch sent county to sweep the road pullouts and the 1 gravel pad everyone uses when they want to feel like they've invented parking. A deputy found a sedan with a temporary tag and a back seat that smelled like cardboard. He let it idle while he looked at his phone. When we went by again, the action camera on the stump had turned to face inland, near 9. A camp on the east shore flickered where it shouldn't. I idled in and found a young couple first-timers by the way there. Gearhead tag still on it, building a ring of stones like we used to tell people before we knew better. "No fires," I said, and they nodded with the relief of people who want rules. The woman pointed at the far shore and said, "Is that a ranger camp?" I looked. It was the set again square tent, square tarp, cooler without heat. The whole place changed an inch to look new. I told them to keep food in their car and to sleep with the boring bravery of people who choose quiet over an Instagram dot at 10. The lake went mirror empty. I parked the skiff at the dock and made notes. The road up to the Narrows turns to dirt halfway, then to ruts, then to ideas. I took the truck to the first turn and shut the lights off. You learn to see more when your eyes stop thinking you'll help them. After 15 minutes, a man walked out from the trailhead with a headlamp pointing at his boots. The beam set low and warm so he wouldn't blind his pupils. He paused at the informational sign long enough to seem like a reader and then climbed into a sedan that hadn't been there 20 minutes earlier. He idled with the dome light on, jotting in a notebook or pretending to. County slid in behind me like a coincidence. We walked the trail together without speaking. The camp wasn't a camp. Inside the tent, a shelf unit held 3 battery packs and a hub like you'd charge 8 action cams at once. A thin cable ran from the hub to the bush where the stump camera sat. No personal gear, no bedroll, no spoon, no book. On the cooler, a sticker with a QR code. I took a photo. "People scan, you harvest phones," the deputy said. "Even if they don't click, Sometimes the handshake tells you a story. The QR resolved to a dead domain. The story we needed was the one about caches and eyes more than codes and clicks. We didn't sit on it. We moved the camera and the hub as evidence and left the tent standing. It looked angry without purpose. At the trailhead, the sedan was gone. On the post where people staple permits, a cluster of bright flag stickers made a shape I didn't want to name, an arrow pointing to the lot, or something else pointing at people who think camping is rest. I still pull skiff duty in June because the water makes the heat gentle and the birds write better jokes than humans. When I see a square camp without foot tracks and a cooler no one ever opens, I make a note, call it in, and let the boring process do what it does. Folks think our job is to chase. Mostly it's to watch long enough that the wrong pattern stops pretending to be luck. If you camp on North Wick and a drone hovers over your stern number, wave. You're not the audience. You're the inventory. Pack your cooler in the car, hang your food higher than is comfortable, and sleep with the confidence of people whose gear is boring to steal. It was a clear Monday in late February when the utility put me on night watch at the Pine Span substation. A concrete rectangle set back in the timber half a mile from the forest road. We'd had copper thefts the previous winter, cut fences, ground wires snipped, a backup generator siphoned dry, and after a storm knocked the line around. Management wanted a human with keys and eyes until crews could swap out the damaged insulators. I'm not a ranger. I'm a contractor with the kind of stubborn sleep that makes nights possible. The substation hums even when nothing moves, a low body noise you stop hearing until it stops. The woods around it hum too, the creek a quarter-mile down, the wind shouldering the cedars. The freezer whisper of frost forming on anything that held day heat. I checked the fence at dusk, clips tight. Bottom edge not lifted, camera covers clear of the usual spider webs that turn IR into white confetti. The generator sheds smelled like diesel and mouse. The lock had new paint. I logged it. At 21:10, a pickup drifted down the access road and stopped just outside the gate. Windows down, engine idling at a pace that suggested old plugs. A man leaned out and asked if the road through was open. That's a thing people ask when they want you to say more than you should. Dead end, I said, and he nodded like he'd hoped I'd say yes, and the word disappointed him on principle. He backed out with the care of a person trying to leave exactly the tire marks he made on the way in. At 22:40. The perimeter camera pinged motion at the southwest corner. Deer, at 23:12. Motion again, same zone. No deer this time, just a dark block at fence height for 3 seconds and gone. I walked the inside line with my light down and my breath loud enough to remind me I was in the building. At the corner, a stick lay inside the fence, end charred. The kind of probe kids make to test if something's lived from a distance, because YouTube taught them. The fence isn't electrified. The stick was theater or education, depending on who held it. I killed my light and let the ambient catch up. You can hear a Zippo lid from farther than you'd think in oak duff. The click came from the tree line, then the soft exhale of fuel. I didn't move. People like to see their light reflected. After a long minute, a tiny orange point winked out and the woods returned to the noise floor. The generator shed sits against the east fence. Door padlocked, the hasp backed by a plate that makes bolt cutters a sad joke. At 0:28, I heard the faintest ping of something metal touching the hasp, hard to place, high. When I reached the corner and angled my light low, a thin line glittered at knee height across the gap between the shed and the fence monofilament again. Tied to a tent stake shoved into the gravel and rigged to lift 3 bottle caps strung like a cheap wind chime. If you walked through without looking, you'd sing to anyone who wanted to hear. I cut the line and pocketed the caps. Whoever said it had done it from the outside, through the chain diamonds, with quiet patience. At 1:05. Headlights crawled down the road without beams. Just parking lights the color of old kitchen bulbs. The truck stopped where the other had, and I heard 2 doors. A red dot winked twice at the edge of the tree's laser. Not sighted at anything, just the lazy drift of someone moving a cheap pointer while they whispered. The cameras caught shapes. I called county with a voice so calm it made me suspicious of my own heart. The dispatcher said the nearest unit was 15 minutes out if they didn't hit ice. I told her I could wait. Waiting is most of security. Move too soon, and you make a story from thin air. Move too late, and you become the story. The fence line microphone new kit the company was proud of picked up a muted clink like a wrench brushed steel. The padlock on the generator is shrouded. You can't get a cutter onto it. But you can wedge a bar under the door and try to flex metal until screws learn physics. I walked the inside again and let my light be obvious now. The red dot vanished. The whispering stopped. The hum of the station covered everything like a hand over a child's ear. When the deputy turned into the access road, he cut his lights early and drifted up like a patient ghost. 2 silhouettes at the tree line blossomed into hands as if they'd been meaning to stretch anyway. He didn't get out. He lit them up with the spotlight and spoke through a PA with that slow math parts of the job require. They were polite. They had names. One had a warrant small enough to make the cuffs more of a formality than a conclusion. The truck bed held nothing you could prosecute after midnight, a length of hose. A cordless saw with a dull blade, a bag of plastic wedge shims. A fuel can that smelled more of hope than diesel. The deputy took statements under breath that made white halos in the cold. He asked if I wanted to press trespass. I did, because paper is how you teach people your fence is a sentence, not a suggestion. He told me what I already knew. They'd be out by morning on their own promise because copper loosens. Hard hands better than facts at 2 a.m. He was tired and professional and left with a wave that meant, call again. I'll come again. At 2:50, I heard tires on the road. A sedan this time, too clean for the mud, idled a minute, then crept past to the old logging spur that runs alongside the station. It stopped there, engine off. I could see a phone glow inside. They weren't here to cut or pry. They were here to watch and text, the kind of thread that keeps people from making the same mistake twice in the same night. I turned one camera to face the spur harder and went back to the office to write real sentences that didn't lean on seemed or maybe. Dawn made the place look harmless. The crew rolled in with coffee and jokes and the particular profanity reserved for bolts that refused to be bolts anymore. I handed over the night's notes and the bottle cap chime like a Boy Scout with a merit badge project. They laughed because it was funny, but they also put a second hasp on the shed and threw a bag of gravel into the corner, where the fence sagged enough to tempt boots. I worked a week of those nights. The same sedan came by twice, same dirt so clean it told on itself. The same men did not. Someone peeled the utility property, no trespass sign off the gate and stuck it back skewed like a wink. We straightened it because order isn't for them. It's for us. On my last shift, a barn owl landed on the fence and looked at me like the luck I am temporary, mostly harmless. Full of noise I didn't invent. I still take substation jobs when winter slows other work because they remind me that quiet doesn't mean empty. If you ever end up guarding a humming square of concrete in a stand of cedars, bring a thermos, bring a notebook, and bring the patience to let other people's plans tire themselves out against a fence you didn't build, but will speak for. And if you find a bottle cap chime where a door meets chain link, pocket it. The person who said it wanted to know what you sound like. Don't sing. It was the first real cold snap of December when I agreed to help a buddy haul supplies into Ridge Lantern Hut, one of those backcountry warming cabins that the volunteer club keeps alive with spit and spreadsheets. The hut sits 3 miles up Fir Ledge Trail steep, switchbacked, and shaded enough that ice hangs on like a stubborn idea. Our plan was simple. Leave the truck at the winter gate by noon. Sled 2 totes of split hardwood and a box of new stovepipe up to the hut. Do a quick sweep for winter damage, and be out before the world went purple. We started up in that bright, brittle air you only get when the mud finally decides to be stone. The sleds chattered on the ice patches and bit into everything else. Past the third switchback, I saw something off. A new hut gives arrow screwed to a snag, rooted letters, glossy paint. It pointed into a side cut I knew for a fact wasn't the trail. The club marks with faded diamonds and a handwriting that looks like a dozen different people took turns. This sign was too pretty decided, confident. Shortcut? My buddy asked, half hopeful. No such thing in December, I said, and we kept to the honest line. 10 minutes later, another shiny arrow appeared. Same font, same confidence, pointing the other direction back across the slope. Someone was bracketing the actual tread with promises at the 4th switchback. The snow turned to packed sugar, and the sled skated. I pulled a little ahead to check the next turn, and nearly walked into a thin cord strung knee-high between 2 alders. It wasn't tight enough to trip a person outright. It was tuned to ring the branches it touched. I cut it with my knife and tucked the ends into my pocket. Past the cord, wet boot prints crossed the trail 2 sets. One narrow like trail runners, one heavier with a shallow heel and a kind of outside edge. Roll you see in people who've done their ankles wrong. We hit the hut by 2. The little porch was blown clean, no footprints. The lot took our key like it was glad to see us. Inside smelled like cold pine and mouse, the way these places are supposed to before anyone lights the first fire of the season. On the table, someone had left a laminated visitor log that wasn't ours, slick paper, printed header. Blanks for name, party, gear on hand. The real log lives in a dented spiral notebook covered in coffee and names from 10 winters. This laminated thing was a list, not a memory. We did our work, swept ash, checked the stovepipe, hung a new shovel on the porch. I signed the spiral the way you do when you want to leave proof for your future self that you were decent. On the way out, my buddy asked about the pretty sign again. Someone's rehearsing, I said, and he didn't make me explain. On the descent, the forest dimmed to shade with each switchback. At the 3rd, where the first false arrow had beckoned, the snow looked fluffed in a way that said something had moved across it and then been smoothed. I stepped into the cut, just a yard or 3, and found a line of tiny adhesive LEDs pressed to stones. A soft, warm path a person could follow in the blue hour without feeling like they were following anything at all. The LEDs led toward a narrow draw where a deadfall lay, under a crust of snow that looked load-bearing from one angle and like a trap from the other. We killed the lights with the heel of a glove and stepped back onto the real trail. Half a mile lower, a drone drifted out from behind firs and hung over us, doing the slow, indifferent pivot that cameras do when someone is panning on a phone with numb fingers. No marker lights this time, just the faint status blink and the sound you feel more than hear. I lifted a hand with zero enthusiasm. The drone slid away toward the first switchback and held station at the winter gate. A Subaru with fogged windows and a dented bumper idled with no one in the front seat. The engine hummed. The heater fan didn't. I saw movement in the rear, someone sitting low, head down, the glow of a screen lighting their face. My buddy and I stashed the sleds, loaded the empty totes, and locked the truck. The Subaru driver never looked up. A minute after we pulled out, headlights picked up in the mirror and followed at a polite distance to the plowed junction. Then turned the other way like we'd bored them. 2 nights later, the club's group chat lit up with a note from a member who'd taken her kids up to the hut, found shiny hut signs pointing wrong. Also a new laminated form asking to list gear on hand, didn't fill it. Someone set little lights along a side path. We stomped them, leaving here before dark next time. Another message chimed in. A ranger had pulled a trail cam aimed at the winter gate. Lens set at plate height. Not a wildlife setup, an inventory machine. I went back the next weekend solo, because unfinished things bother me more than cold does. The glossy signs were gone, but screw holes in the snag told on them. The cord I'd cut had been retied tighter. At the hut, the spiral still sat on the table, but the laminated sheet had moved into the doorway like a clipboard begging for hands. I slid it under the stove and lit a small fire, the kind that warms metal and takes the slick off your breath, then stamped it out before I left. On the porch rail, pressed into a drift with clean fingers, someone had written "shortcut" and drawn an arrow into the trees. It was the kind of joke that isn't a joke at all. I still haul for the club when they ask. We stopped posting exact tote counts in the public calendar. We started walking the first half-mile of trail after a snow to knock down any false path before someone less paranoid comes along. If you ever use a warming hut in winter, do what the old logbooks tell you without words. Leave wood, sweep ash, shut the door, and take nothing with you that can be turned into a ledger about how soft your pack is. And if a glossy new sign points where your map and the ground disagree, trust the ground. It was a warm Saturday in early September when I decided to finally do the Devil's Hinge traverse 14 miles of old bridle path and logging grade that buckles around 2 ravines and then drops to a trailhead with a historical sign that leaves out the only interesting parts. I left the truck at Sunrise Lot at 8:10. Tucked my note on the dash the way people who read too many SAW reports do, and started steady because heat and pride don't mix on long days. The first 6 miles were the good kind of boring birds working the edge. A black snake sunning exactly where the tread narrows, a chipmunk with opinions. At mile 7, the bridle path met a grade cut into the hillside, so clean you feel like you're walking a sentence someone wrote 100 years ago. A fresh cedar plank sign at the junction read "Fire Detour Gives" in tidy letters. No burn in months. No closure notice posted on the state site last night. I took a picture and stayed with the map. A half-mile later, a green shipping container sat in a landing like a period at the end of a thought. A laminated sheet on the door said, "Staging no public access." Same font as the detour sign. The padlock looked new enough to smell like the aisle at the hardware store that sells hope. The ground around the box was too tidy. No paper cups, no flagging scraps, no muddy boot tracks walking the same circle over and over the way crews do when they're waiting on a machine to stop being a machine. I walked the edge and found the old grade continuing past a berm. Someone had thrown up with a bucket loader to make uncurious people turn around. Past the berm. The world got honest again. Brush on the edges. A low crown, osprey shadow rolling over the ravine. A quarter mile on, a chain hung across the grade, padlocked to a post that hadn't been there last winter. On the chain a bright arrow pointed back the way I'd come. None of it existed on the map. That alone doesn't make a thing wrong. Maps always lag. But fake closures grow a smell after a while. I backtracked to the last water and took the variant that keeps you above the ravines. 2 miles later, the grade ran through a cut with power lines overhead. A man in a vest stood by a truck under the wires staring at a clipboard, the way people stare at props when they don't know their lines. "Trails closed past the gate," he said without preamble, pointing back the way I'd not gone. "Which gate?" I said. "The chain," he said. "Construction. What crew?" I asked. He said a company name that lost its contract 2 seasons ago. The same old logo that keeps showing up on surplus vests in pawn shops. I nodded like I believed him, thanked him like he'd saved me a step, and kept walking. He watched me go with the mild, clinical interest of a person counting something not attached to me. The descent into the second ravine is where Devil's Hinge earns its name. Switchbacks tight as thought. A creek at the bottom that sounds like comfort until you realize it echoes everything else too. I stopped at the last bench above the water to drink and heard voices down at the bridge. Not conversation inventory. The tone people use when they're reading off a list to someone who already knows what's on it. I stayed in the trees and watched the script. 2 men in ball caps worked at the bridge. One loosened bolts on the handrail like he meant to remove a section and reinstall it a foot out of true. The other set a small camera module under the plank at waist height, pointed back up trail. A cable ran to a battery pack wedged into a knot. Whole, lightweight, disposable, the kind of setup that catches numbers and faces and maybe what kind of stove a person carries and when they expect to be back. I could have called it in then. I didn't. Cell service lives in pockets out here, and I wasn't standing in one. Instead, I crossed above them on the hillside, picking a careful line as the creek opened the world wide under my boots. They finished their work, tested the wobble with a theatrical grimace, just enough to spook a first-timer at dusk, and walked the way I'd come. Not the way the map said a person who belonged would go. 30 minutes later, as I gained the opposite rim, I heard a truck fire on the power line cut and head toward Sunrise. Lot in a lazy hurry. The last miles got long in the way miles do when your head is a half step ahead of your feet. At the lot, 5 cars sat with sun baking sent into the dashboards. A tan sedan idled, driver's window down, elbow out. The man inside had the patient posture of a clerk in a slow shop. "They still working up there?" he asked, casual, friendly, like he was rooting for me to say a sentence he'd written. "Lots of signs today." "Looked quiet to me," I said, and opened the truck too calmly. He glanced at my plate, then at the other cars, then back to neutral like a person resetting an expression for the next customer. I sat there longer than it takes to breathe on purpose. He left without hurry, took the turn toward the highway, and merged with the Saturday we pretend is simpler than it is. I drove to the ranger station because later is the enemy of good reports. The duty ranger put a straight edge on my map as I talked and marked the fire detour with a pencil so soft it made a bruise of the page. He'd heard about the container from a hiker the day before and about the chain from a runner who'd hopped it and then felt guilty. County swung the road while I wrote. The container sat on a day-to-day lease paid by a shell company. The laminated signs used a font a local print shop recognized from a batch 2 months ago. The bridge cam watched faces for a week at a time and then moved, probably in someone's backpack that also carried cheap bolts and green painter's tape. We walked the lot camera together. 2 hours before I came down, the tan sedan had driven a slow figure 8 and stopped nose to nose with 3 cars in sequence. Long enough for the plate reader to have a chance if we'd installed one. Which we hadn't. It had paused longest at a hatchback with a roof box and a cracked taillight, then left. Then returned, then left again. No broken glass. Nothing stolen that day. Inventory, practice, schedule. I still run Devil's Hinge because the switchbacks earn you a silence you can't buy in town. And because every time I put my feet on the old grade I feel like I'm reading something written by hands that knew more about gravity than the rest of us do. But now I take a picture of every detour I didn't see on last week's map and send it to the address the ranger gave me. And when a man in a vest I don't recognize waves me toward a better route, I smile like a tourist and keep my line. If a bridge wobbles at the handrail, just enough to feel like a lesson, I put my hand on the other rail and step where boards show 1,000 confident scuffs. The forest doesn't need my fear to be itself. The people trying to make a timetable out of my Saturday do. I'm not on their schedule anymore. It was the last Sunday of March when I drew the early patrol on Alderspan. The narrow footbridge that ties 2 halves of the reserve together over a gorge that swallows wind and gives back your heartbeat. Spring here means patchy snow in the shade, mud in the places your boots remember, and enough meltwater under the planks to make every step sound like you're tapping glass. I left the truck at the gate at 6:10, logged the weather clear, 34. Barometer rising, and walked the service road until birds decided I wasn't worth discussing. The footbridge isn't new, but it pretends to be if you keep the deck oiled and the bolts honest. We'd had 2 calls the week before, hikers reporting the handrail felt wrong, wobbly in a way that makes your stomach take a vote. The district wanted eyes on it, not just wrenches. I prefer wrenches. Eyes take home what hands can leave behind. From 10 yards out, I could see someone had done work-fresh tool marks on the outer rail bolts, the paint scraped in a neat half-moon where a socket had bit. Not ours, we mark hardware we touch with a red stripe. These had no stripe. I pressed the rail and it moved an inch, then set. Not unsafe, just tuned to read as unsafe if you didn't commit to crossing. The kind of thing that turns a dusk decision into a camp you never meant to make. Mid-span, I crouched and checked underneath. A small metal box retail camera housing was screwed to the brace facing up trail, lens angled to catch faces as they think about turning back. A wire ran along the beam to a battery pack tucked under a plank. Clean install. Not wildlife placement. No bait, no trail. Whoever said it understood what hesitation shows. I didn't yank it. Evidence needs a chain more than it needs my irritation. I photographed the mount, logged the coordinates, and stepped off the far end into fir shade that makes the air smell like coin rolled in a palm. 200 yards past the bridge, a detour sign had bloomed overnight. Fire crew use only with a crisp arrow pointing into a cut I didn't know. The font was the same as those glossy detour planks we've been collecting like trading cards since last summer. The ground beyond the sign was swept duff brushed aside. Sticks leaned into a line a tired person would read as mercy. I've learned to ask the dirt, not the arrow. The true tread wore its 1,000-foot shine. I stayed with it. At the first creek crossing I found a length of thin cord strung shin-high and a trio of bottle caps tied as a bell, tucked in brush where a hiker stepping wide would sing for anyone with ears and a plan. I cut it and pocketed it, because sometimes my irritation wins small battles. In the soft mud beyond, a narrow runner's print overlapped a broader boot with a shallow heel. They moved together, not chasing, not fleeing. Partners doing inventory. Half a mile later, the trail crusted into a saddle where sound travels too far. From the right, uphill, came a whistle. 3 short blasts, clean textbook. I answered with one long, one short, habit before thought. A voice floated back. Over here, wrong in the way a recording is wrong, no breath. No edge, the words like painted stones instead of river carried. I stood still until the forest put its hand back over the moment. Describe your location, I called, using the rule that has saved more ankles than bravery has. Water? Slope? Trees? Silence, then the same over here. Same distance, different side. I took the ridge instead of the echo. From there I could see the detour's destination. A downed alder field, dressed up to look like a path. Slick bark ready to throw a knee that can't afford it. The false line ran through and out to a logging road that paralleled the park boundary. It's not poachers, I told myself, not tonight. It's people who move small product and prefer a schedule. Mid-morning I turned back. Keyed dispatch with a location and a feeling. And headed for the bridge with the kind of impatience that makes boots lie about their grip. A young couple approached from the opposite direction. First-timers, new packs, tags still on the tips of their poles. The look of people who believe nature reads your itinerary. Is the bridge safe? The woman asked, hand on the rail, eyes locked on mine. It's as safe as choosing to cross, I said, which is true in more places than this. One at a time, no bouncing. Keep hands light. They went. Mid-span, the man glanced up, saw the camera, and did what people do. He flinched. That little draw in the shoulders. Guilt without cause. What's that? He called, park study, I lied. Because sometimes lying keeps people safer than truth does. They crossed, thanked me in the awkward tone of strangers who have used up the courage they brought, and dissolved into second dash growth. At the far abutment, the camera's battery indicator blinked low. I took a photo of the card door taped, green strip with yesterday's date, and called county with the short version. Camera pointed at faces. Rail tuned to spook. Detour sign not ours, false tape. We'll swing a car by the pullout, the dispatcher said. We've had a tan sedan counting plates there. I walked the far loop and returned in the afternoon. The camera was gone, mount screws still warm in the sun. On the bridge deck, someone had chalked a neat square where it once sat, like a crime scene for retail gear. The rail bolts looked touched again. The slop felt the same. I tightened two and slapped our red stripe across them. Not because it would hold, but because it would say, someone who belongs. Here, touch this. At the pull-out, a deputy idled across from a tan sedan with the window down and nobody convincingly interested in the view. The deputy and I traded notes without drama. He had a photo of a QR sticker someone found on a cooler at a primitive site 2 coves over a dead link. But the handshake told a story about phones and proximity. Inventory, not robbery, he said. Until it's both. I still check Alder span once a week in spring, and the rail still breathes if you press it to see what you want to fear. If you're there at dusk and you see a detour sign that wasn't on yesterday's map, take a photo and trust the dirt. If a whistle calls you over here without telling you water, slope, trees, answer with your feet on the tread and your questions pointed at the sky. The gorge will give you your heartbeat back eventually. So will the bridge, if you remember it was built by hands and maintained by people who care. More about bolts than drama. It was a blue sky. Tuesday in mid-July when my sister talked me into a loop. Out to Quarry Point, a shoulder of granite above the river where the wind keeps thee. Deerflea's honest and the old stone company left behind a road that still pretends it knows what trucks are. She likes high places with edges. I like low creeks that pretend they'll never flood again. We split the difference. Up Old Road. Lunch at the Point, down by the Birch Ravine. Home before the heat got mean. The first mile is all lichen and old culverts and the kind of blind corners that make you decide how much you trust brakes made of boots. At the second bend, a new sign had appeared. Scenic overlook gives rooted letters, glossy paint, screwed to a birch at eye level. It pointed into a faint path I didn't recognize. The official map I'd checked that morning, yes, I'm that person, shows only one spur, a quarter mile farther. Shortcut? My sister said, half teasing, half hopeful. She read my face and laughed. Ground over arrow, she said, quoting me to me. We stuck with the road. The real spur arrived where it always does, where a blown-down pine points like a schoolmarm's finger. Halfway up, I saw a length of monofilament twined through the blueberry scrub at shin height, tied to a twig under a rock so it would hum if you brushed it. I cut it with the small knife my sister calls my grandpa habit, and kept it. I'm building a museum of other people's plans, one pocket at a time. Quarry Point did what it always does. Opened the river like a book and let the wind push the pages. We ate peanut butter on the warm rock and watched a pair of turkey vultures ride a thermal like an elevator you can't afford. On the way down, we took the Birch Ravine Trail cooler, dimmer. The air full of that green shade smell that tricks you into thinking you've always been this person. In the second switchback I heard a whistle. Not distress, 2 short notes, then one, like a person trying out a tune. It came from down trail where the ravine deepens and the bridge crosses at its narrowest. I answered without thinking, a reflex leftover from years of reading ranger blogs at 2 a.m. The reply wasn't a tune. Hey, a voice said, casual, close. You coming? We rounded the bend slow. The bridge was there, solid, old timbers, squared by hands that knew straight. On the far side, a man in a cap leaned on the rail, back to us, looking at water the way people look when they wish thinking could flatten rocks. My sister said, "Afternoon," preemptive friendliness. He didn't turn. He said, "You coming?" Again, in a voice that sounded like a good copy of human, but still a copy too smooth on the vowels. No bleed from breath into the words. I don't know what made me look away from him. Maybe the light shifted wrong. Maybe the hair on my arms remembered a rumor before my head did. On the near side, at hip height in the brush, a small camera module sat taped to a branch, lens pointed square at the place we'd step onto the bridge. A thin wire ran under the plank to the far rail. On the far side post, a tiny speaker hid in a knothole, its grill clogged with dust. The voice we heard had never left a mouth. "Let's give him space," I said, loud enough for the microphone to love me. We stepped off the tread and up into the boulders where footing is honest and angles don't lie. The man didn't turn. He kept his posture and his patience and whatever story he needed us to feed. We followed the rocks until we rejoined trail beyond the bridge and walked without talking until our feet remembered how to be feet again. Half a mile later the trail crossed the old road. A contract truck sat half off the gravel under the power lines, hood up. A triangle reflector set with the care of people who took the class. A man in a safety vest waved, friendly, harmless. "Y'all know if the overlook is open?" he asked. His vest logo was a company that used to hold the right to trim under these lines. 2 seasons out of date. My sister said, "We didn't go," in a tone that tasted like gravel. He nodded and smiled and scratched something in a notebook like he was counting birds. Back at the lot, 2 cars idled with windows down, one tan sedan with a temporary tag. One hatchback with the glass cleaned by a circle of someone's careful hand. A deputy rolled past, slow. The sedan left like it had just remembered an appointment. The deputy gave us the "You okay?" eyebrows. We nodded because we were, in the way that counts. That night my sister texted me a photo she'd taken without meaning to. A reflection in the bridge water of the far side post with the knothole. The little dark square where the speaker hid. Was he even there? She wrote. I wrote back the boring truth, that the man we saw was probably a person. But the voice we heard didn't have to be. 2 days later, the ranger posted a note. Unapproved signage reported near Quarry Point. Please follow only official blazes. Do not respond to whistles with no location description. People will read it. Some, and the rest will trust their feet. The false signs come down as fast as we can drive screws out of green wood. They sprout again where the road kinks and a tired person wants mercy. I still go to Quarry Point when the river warms enough to reflect color back at the sky. If there's a whistle on the way down, I ask it to tell me about water, slope, trees. If it doesn't answer with breath, I keep walking. My sister carries the little knife now, calls it her grandpa habit, and cuts line when she sees it. The museum in my pocket has new exhibits. Her pocket has the rest. It was the first week of November when the lodge put me on night watch for the shuttered cabins along Jackdaw Row. The lakeside strip they only open on holiday weekends and weddings. Off-season, the row is supposed to be empty, curtains closed, fridges propped, doors dead-bolted, a long rectangle of quiet with the lake scuffing stone below. They'd had break-ins the previous fall. Pilfered propane, TVs lifted. The odd microwave walked out like a briefcase. My job was to sit in the golf cart with a thermos and a notebook, do loops, and make sure the place sounded like it was being listened to. At 22:30, the generator on cabin 6 hiccuped. It's one of 2 cabins the lodge keeps powered to keep pipes from telling spring stories. The hiccup wasn't power. It was a sound in the duct, the brief ping of thin metal flexing somewhere it shouldn't. I unlocked the service door. stepped into the smell of stale coffee and chlorine, and stood still until my ears forgot to be helpful. The ping came again, softer, from the ceiling vent over the kitchenette. Not raccoon. Not water hammer. A sound like knuckles on sheet metal in a pocket where knuckles shouldn't fit. I killed the interior light and stood at the window. Outside, Frost had written familiar cursive on the golf cart windshield. Down lake a pair of headlights rose, fell, and went dark. The cabin's line a gentle S. Angles hide more than people think. I stepped out the back and walked between 6 and 7, where the shadows have their own shadows. At the far corner of 7, the crawlspace hatch sat askew, screws backed out and hiding in the grass like teeth. I knelt, breathed copper dust and mouse pepper, and shone my light low. A coil of monofilament ran along the sill to a cluster of bottle caps, powered by wind, taped under the joist. I cut them loose and pocketed them. The hatch had fresh boot prints on the inside frame, narrow mass on the outside edge. Our friend with the rolled ankle loves resorts as much as trailheads. It seems at 2312, motion pinned on the dock camera. 2 figures, hooded, walked down, paused by the rental canoe rack, and turned back without touching anything. Inventory. Testing who wakes. I radioed the lodge manager. He was in the office 2 buildings up, watching the feed. "Want me to call county?" he asked. I told him yes, but calm. "If you light up everything at once, people like this learn your buttons in one night." At 2326. The air in cabin 6 moved in that deliberate way duct air moves when a vent is removed and replaced. I stepped into the hall and saw the grill askew. A small rectangle of black glinted in the dim camera. Adhesive mount, pointed at the interior door. On the floor beneath it lay a laminated card that didn't belong to any lodge. "Security audit, please list electronics on site." Someone had placed a clipboard where a cleaner would find it in the morning and fill in a shopping list with neat, paid for letters. I didn't touch the camera. I didn't pull the card. I wrote what I saw and backed out. The cart's tires whispered over frosted asphalt like a person biting a sleeve. I passed cabin 3 and wanted to stop and check the porch box where they store extra linens. I didn't. I kept the loop, because being seen doing the same thing is a kind of fence. At 004. A sedan idled at the road, pull-out tan, window down, elbow out. The signature we've all learned to expect. A drone hummed above the trees, low enough to feel but not hear, its little status flash winking like a bored eye. The deputy slid in behind the sedan, nose to nose, lights off, the dance we all know. The sedan played polite. The deputy played bored. The drone drifted toward the dock and then out over the dark lake until only the heartbeat flash betrayed it. We walked cabin 6 with county at 040. The crawlspace was empty, except for the wind-made chime and the little camera mount now bare. The vent grill screws sat in a neat triangle on the counter, like someone wanted us to know they owned a driver and patience. The deputy looked at the laminated card and grunted. "They've been doing this along the river stretch," he said. "Leave forms in cabins closed for the season. Come back on a cleaning day. Half the time folks fill them out." He pocketed it. "We'll print a notice for your staff." At 1:20, the dot camera pinged again. I rolled down with county trailing. On the far bank, across 100 yards of black water, a pair of small warm dots winked along the shore at steady height, paused opposite the rental rack and winked out. Not headlamps. Not cigarettes. The deputy said, "They're marking where to look later." He parked nose out and muttered something to his shoulder mic, the way a person swears into their sleeve at a stubborn jar. By 2 o'clock, the frost had turned the cart's steering wheel into an honesty quiz. I kept moving. Movement is a sentence that says, "Not tonight." At 2:18, Cabin 2's porch light flickered once and died. The breaker had tripped without cause. Inside on the kitchenette table, someone had set a pocket speaker the size of a deck of cards face down. It pulsed a tiny red light, sensed to nothing, waiting to be asked a question by a phone we didn't own. I bagged it. Out front, the sedan had left. A new car idled older, SUV, cracked taillight. One of those small shifts these nights do. The cast changes. The script stays. At dawn, the lake erased its secrets in brightness. The manager brewed a pot, and we sat with the deputy and wrote sentences without maybe in them. The lodge ordered lock covers for the crawls and metal straps for the vent grills. We moved the dock camera to watch the road, not the water. We put a sign on Cabin 6's fridge that said, "No audits. Staff do not fill lists." The staff laughed and then didn't. I still do Jackdaw Row when the leaves fall and weddings wait for pumpkins. If you find a laminated form asking you to list what's inside a locked room, you're not looking at paperwork. You're looking at a shopping cart. If a vent grill sits crooked and the screws are proud like they want attention, give them none until someone with a badge says touch it. And if the night hums at the wrong frequency, adjust your loop, flex the predictable edges, and remember the only thing you owe strangers is your presence, not your schedule. It was the third week of August when the county sent me to audit fire lanes along the eastern ridge, a job that mostly means driving old service roads and making sure the brush crews didn't leave their equipment to grow roots. The ridge runs 20 miles end to end and gets cell service on only the luckiest peaks. I signed out the truck at 7 o'clock, packed 2 gallons of water, and told dispatch I'd call in every 2 hours or when I hit signal again, whichever came first. By 10, the road had gone from gravel to suggestion. Pine needles whispered under the tires. The world smelled like sun-baked resin. At the 7-mile mark, I stopped to walk a section that tends to wash out. A metal post that used to hold a reflective marker had been pulled, rebar twisted like someone used it for leverage. The dirt nearby had been flattened by tires wider than any brush rig, maybe a work truck, maybe something heavier. Half a mile farther, I found a service detour sign nailed to a sapling. County doesn't make those signs, wrong font, wrong yellow. It pointed up a spur that the map called decommissioned 10 years ago. My orders said audit all active fire lanes. This one wasn't on the list. But the fresh tread in the dust said someone disagreed. I locked the truck and hiked the spur. It ran a quarter mile before ending in a small clearing that smelled faintly of diesel. In the center stood a shipping container painted brown to pretend it wasn't metal. The lock was fresh, big brass, keyed not combo. No markings. Behind it, tire tracks turned back downhill like someone had reversed in, dropped the box, and left clean. I photographed everything and started back. When I reached the truck, a note sat under the wiper. Paper torn from a field notebook, pencil neat. Audit complete. Proceed west. No signature, no logo. My chest tightened the way it does when the air doesn't match your memory. I looked back up the spur. No motion, no sound but cicadas grinding the heat. At mile 9, I hit a stretch where the pines thin enough to show the ridge beyond. Down in the draw, a plume of dust trailed a vehicle I hadn't heard. Quiet engine. Dark color, moving steady along the same road I'd just driven, but half a mile behind. When the trees closed, the dust stopped too. I pulled over, waited 5 minutes, then 10. No engine noise ever reached me. At noon, I climbed out onto the old radio overlook, a slab of rock with just enough cell signal to send coordinates. Dispatch came through fuzzy but clear enough. I told them about the container and the note. The supervisor said, "We've got no crews east this week. Sit tight, I'll have county meet you at the junction." That was 15 miles west, 3 hours minimum by these roads. I ate lunch watching heat shimmer over the valley. The forest down there looked calm enough to make you think the world's organized. Then, faintly, from upslope a metallic pop like a bolt under stress. I scanned the ridge but saw nothing move. The pop came again, closer, rhythmic. Ping, ping, pause. Not gunfire. Not tools. Echoes of metal cooling? No, it carried forward, not down. Something walking with hardware that didn't fit its stride. I slid behind the truck door and waited. The pings stopped. Then, from the opposite direction, the faint whine of a drone, a consumer model by the sound. Small prop noise, battery faint. It came in from the east, hovered 50 feet above the road, rotated twice, and angled its camera down at me like it knew exactly where to look. I raised my phone to take a photo, but before I could frame it, the drone shot upward and vanished into sun glare. I don't like coincidences that record things. When I reached the junction at 15:20, the sheriff's SUV sat idling with the windows down. 2 deputies leaned against the push bar, sipping water. "We saw your note," one said before I could speak. "Figured you'd call it in." I frowned. "How'd you see it?" He held up his phone, showed a picture my truck windshield, my own hand reaching for the paper. Taken from eye level across the road. I hadn't seen another vehicle all day. The other deputy shrugged. "Probably a hiker with a zoom lens. Happens." He said it in the tone of a man who knows that words can be facts if you say them flat enough. They followed me back to the spur. The container was gone. Ruts where tires had been fresh. Even the bent rebar post was gone. The dirt still held its shape, as if the world hadn't decided what version of the day to believe. "Wind'll do that," one deputy said. The other laughed like he wanted to believe it. We filed the report as unauthorized. Equipment cache removed before inspection. The county clerk asked if I wanted to log the note as evidence. I said yes, but the deputy waved it off. "Just some bored prepper," he said. Maybe. A week later on a different ridge, another ranger found a similar note, same handwriting, same pencil block letters, under his wiper. Audit complete. Proceed south. We sent both to headquarters. The handwriting analyst said they were identical down to pressure, as if traced with a light box. The problem, one was found 50 miles away. Both on the same day. Now I keep the notes in a file labeled Miskfield. The paper still smells faintly of pencil dust and diesel. Every August, when the heat turns the air glassy and the bugs make more sound than sense, I drive the ridge again. The rebar posts are all still there now, rusting as they should. The only new thing last year was a single bolt on the overlook railing, brand new. Too shiny, turned just enough that it squeaks when the wind shifts. I leave it alone. Some bolts you don't tighten until you know whose hand was on the wrench last. It was the middle of May when I got the call to assist search and rescue on the west boundary lost hiker. Solo, last ping 3 miles north of the radio tower. Typical spring case. Snowmelt makes trails vanish. GPS apps get ambitious. And cell service dies where the map pretends it lives. I met the team at the trailhead around 17 o'clock. Light until 9 if we were lucky. The missing man's name was Daniel. 36, day pack, bright jacket. One message sent before the phone went dead. "Camp here tonight, see you in morning." No one received coordinates. Only that. We split into pairs. I went with Marcy, who knows every drainage by smell. The air carried snowmelt pine, and that distant sweetness of decaying fir needles forest perfume. We followed the main trail for an hour before veering toward a faint spur leading downhill. The prints were easy at first, boot treads, deep and deliberate. Then, half a mile on, they turned confused. Heel marks sideways, one shoe drag, then none at all. Like someone started hurrying without aim. At 1910 we hit the creek. Water high, fast, cold enough to make sound sharp. Across it, A flat spot showed signs of a small campfire ring of stones, a damp patch where a tent might have been. No tent now, no pack. On one of the stones sat a laminated card with pre-printed blanks. If you're stuck or lost, write name and date. Below, in pencil, the name Daniel and the date today. The rest of the sheet empty. Whoever gave him that card had planned for him to use it, but there's no such form in our kits. It wasn't ours. Marcy checked the stones. Soot still warm. He was here within an hour, she said. I nodded, then froze. Upstream, on a branch caught in current, hung a strip of red cloth, new, glossy. We waded across, careful on slick rocks. The cloth wasn't tied. It was stapled. Single staple clean. Under it, in the mud, boot prints again ours, and is now interwoven. A quarter-mile beyond, the creek split into 2 ravines. Between them, on a log, lay a small silver whistle. Not scratched, not dropped, placed. Marcy picked it up with gloved fingers. Standard SAR issue, she said. But stamped last year. Ours haven't been restocked since before that. She pocketed it. We radioed base. Possible trail markers, non-standard gear in play. The reply was static and half a syllable of copy. At dusk, the trees began to glow faintly with the kind of light that doesn't know its source. Sky reflection. Water bounce, or maybe just eyes adjusting to everything green. We camped near the ravine fork. The night stayed quiet until 2 o'clock, when a whistle blew 3 short bursts, crisp, close, deliberate. We both sat up. I answered with one long, one short. The reply came not from the ravine but from behind us, up the slope where we'd come from. We hiked that direction with our lights hooded. After 50 yards, something reflected square, about chest height. It was a mirror panel nailed to a tree, angled toward our camp. The whistle came again, farther off, 3 bursts. Then silence. When we reached the tree, a small card was taped to the mirror. Relay 3, active. Handwriting neat. Block letters, same pencil line weight as the audit notes we'd been seeing on other ridges. We took a photo, pulled the card, and kept moving uphill. At the next clearing, footprints multiplied 4 distinct pairs, different sizes, all recent. They circled a flat area where someone had tamped grass in a pattern like a mat. In the center sat a coffee can full of nails, each wrapped in tape to dull the heads. Wait, Marcy said. For something. Maybe a sensor anchor. Maybe a test. Maybe a distraction. At first light, base called other teams found Daniel half a mile north of our camp. Alive, mild hypothermia, disoriented. Said he followed a whistle, someone left for him, thinking it was us. Each time he reached a spot, another whistle would sound ahead. When his phone battery died, he followed one last call into a gully and slipped trying to climb out. He said the whistles came from everywhere and sounded recorded. He never saw people. Only the red cloths and the laminated card. We collected the mirror and the can, left the nails where they were, and hiked out with Daniel on a stretcher relay. At the trailhead, he saw the ranger trucks and whispered, "Those are real, right?" The kind of question that makes you stop before answering. I told him yes because he needed yes more than maybe. 2 days later, a maintenance crew found another card near the Ridge Road. Relay 4, complete. Proceed south. No footprints this time, no whistle. Just the card tucked under a rock facing the sun. County logged it as vandalism. Marcy and I kept a copy for the file. The handwriting was identical to the other ridge notes. Same hand, same pressure, same person or machine. When I hear 3 short bursts at night, I wait before answering. I ask the air what it wants. If it's human, it'll say more than over here. If it's not, I let silence do its work. The woods don't need me to be brave. They just need me to stay on the real trail and write things down before they're forgotten. And maybe that's enough.